I get that right? Great. All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, that moves us along to item number 4, citizen comment period. There are, is there anyone signed up to speak? Thank you. We will move on to item number 5, business items. 5A, approvals. Look for the minutes for September 28th, 2021, Water Commission regular meeting. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes, starting on the right? Nope. On the left? Okay, no corrections to the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes from September.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes for September. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's right, unanimous. We will move on now to item 5B. Discussions, reports, and updates. Water Manager Monthly Activity Report. I'll turn over to Mr. Steinmetz, our Public Works Director, for review of the monthly report.
Thank you. For September, we pumped 108.16 acre feet out of the Edwards. We have 407.11 available to us. In Trinity, we pumped only 3.22 acre feet. All of our samples came back good for the month of September that we did. Water loss was at 2.3%, so it's down some. We have a few new things we have under the water monthly activities we've added. We've added automatic drafts for customers, which is 677. AMI customer portal profiles, 548. Active leak info codes alert, well, that was there before, but that's 152. E-billing customers is 368. We have pending 6 or 5 now water leak adjustments to go through. Whispering Oaks is complete. Wastewater contractor has installed 100% of the wastewater main, and we're still working with TxDOT on working for funding for the TxDOT project on 2252. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to point out a few things, if you don't mind, real quick. I'm not sure if y'all watched or went to the council meeting, but it was pointed out during the city council meeting about that water loss rate of 2.3%. That's, I'm not sure everybody understands how impressive that is, but that is well below the national average. So that's just a great job that you guys are doing. Oh, by the way, I think, did the water consumption go down or remain the same there? Oh, it went up a little bit. Okay, so I was hoping the water consumption went down and then made you look even better, right? No, just a great job on there. Also, I hope everybody caught that he mentioned there's a few things under the Water Department monthly activities about the automatic draft customers, the customer portal, and the e-billing stuff. So I would encourage everybody to once again, bring those up. My neighborhood had a homeowners association meeting not too long ago, and the president of the homeowners association was nice enough to bring all those things up. And then I brought them up again, trying to get more and more people on there. It's just, it's good for the customer, and it's good for the water department. So we want to keep trying to push those. I will say though, at our AMI customers at 548, so roughly about 35% there. That's actually really good. Normally, these acceptance rates for these things are significantly lower than that. So I think that's directly related to probably CAT's outreach efforts and pushing that thing. Hey, you got up there and spoke multiple times trying to get people to sign up. So, but let's keep pushing it. Let's keep doing there. Like I said, especially for that customer portal profiles, I think that is actually one of the best benefits to some of the customers that are out there setting your own alerts and everything. So please help me out, help CAT out, help get the word out for everybody. I think that was everything I was going to monologue on, so any questions for Mr. Steinmetz on the right?
Yes, Mr. Stein, I just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the plan to address the Edwards allotment between now and the end of the year. Had some trouble last year, so what's our plan there?
Well, we're roughly doing, when we're running the 2252 plant, we're roughly coming up with about 100 acre feet a month. When we get to our last 100 acre feet, we're going to slow it up quite a bit and just really watch it really closely. Maybe stop at about 50 acre feet.
On the left? No questions. All right, thank you, Mr. Steinmetz. All right, item 2B2, items applicable to the Water Commission discussed at the October City Council meeting. I was actually out of town, so Vice Chair Harshberger took that meeting. Thank you very much. During the council meeting, like I mentioned before, there's a couple people that brought up, Councilman Valdez, who's here, and the mayor both brought up about that, how efficient our water system is and how that number is well below the national average. I think the national average was 15%. Does anybody remember the actual number?
It's close to 16%, but I'm unclear if that's the overall or small systems, so there might be a difference.
Do you happen to know, Stephen?
Usually that's the national average. That's usually the average of a compilation of all the usage for the entire year, and they tabulate it at the end of the years. But being that we're doing it month by month, we can still get a pretty accurate assessment of that.
15, 16, no matter what it is, you're doing great. But that was brought up also. The engineer spoke, and he talked about the wastewater ordinance has been sent to the city staff, a draft of it, and they're reviewing that. And I expect we'll see it in a month or two or so. Is that good?
More likely.
Okay, great. They're also looking at the 2252 3009. He's talked to us about that before, about the water main there, and they're looking into that. Vice Chair Harshberger got up there and he talked about the special meeting a little bit and about the change that we made to the rate process in the last meeting. Did I miss anything, sir?
Just brief them on the chair and vice chair for the other year, so I think that was the only additional item.
Thank you. Ms. Kane, anything? Okay, great. Commissioners, any questions on the left? Right? All right, we'll keep rolling on here. Next item is item C, recommendations. First off, I'll remind everybody by law, the Water Commission does not have the authority to grant any financial credits. The Water Commission can only make recommendations to either the city administrator to take action for credits up to $500 or to the city council to take action for credits over $500. We'll follow the same process as previous meetings. We have one water leak adjustment to review and make recommendations regarding the request. And this is a request for water leak adjustment for 21926 Park Lane Drive for the billing period of March 23rd, 2021 to April 23rd, 2021. Mr. Steinmetz, could you please tell us about the request, what you found, and your recommendation?
This is for a leak adjustment request for 21926 Parkview Drive. The petitioner said that they had a leak, and apparently their neighbor notified them the night before, and around the morning they had it fixed. We had somebody come out from the Public Works Department to go verify what was going on. He said it was on their side of the meter, maybe within a foot of the meter. He said it was PVC. So, I mean, this one's kind of a hard call. I don't know if when those meters got installed, because sometimes whenever you're installing a meter, stuff can break on either side. So I don't know if it might have been a repair that happened, because we did have a company come through here and put all these meters in, so. But yeah, our employee said that it looked like it was on their side, and it didn't look like it was caused by what we did during the installation. So I'm gonna go by that. I did ask him I sent him some questions. He responded to them. Mainly just 3 questions. Let's see where they're at.
I will say, real quick, while you're looking there, you won't see this data up on the overhead. It's only going to be in our packets for the privacy rules that changed in September for the state of Texas.
Yes, he had a company repair the leak. It was repaired that day. They didn't have any pictures of the leak, so that's why I couldn't really have a good idea of what happened or what it looked like unless we went back up there and dug it back up. As you can see in your packets, what is this at? The highlighted area is a pretty significant leak. I didn't highlight all the way up to the top because that went into the next billing year, but I included all the numbers from the top from the 24th where it stopped at into that. It just didn't highlight it also, so I figured it would be the same leak contributed to it, so. And let's see, where do I got that? That's- not my paperwork. But yeah, a big leak occurred. I would say that they can get some sort of leak adjustment. I wouldn't say it was the fault of the city or the installation.
Michelle, are we not even allowed to put the adjustment summary up?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, if you could scroll down a little bit so everybody can see the numbers there.
So technically, because of House Bill 872, we're not allowed to show the usage of a customer's water usage. So.
Okay, so no, we can't show
So
it.
technically, I can't show that.
Okay.
All I can show is in all reality, I don't know if I should be.
It's okay,
showing
we've all got our
this.
packets, that's fine.
Okay, I apologize.
Just give everybody a second to, well, we can go ahead and, so we've got the summary from the water department there. Commissioners, do we have any questions for the water department, starting on the right?
I guess I'm gonna try to word it as a question. So the customer made a statement from their plumber, or whoever repaired the PVC pipe, that they believe that connector had not been put in fully into the new meter. Your statement is that you don't believe that's the case. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate on your reasoning for that statement?
When they're installing the new meters, they're adding some extra linkage in there because they're making up because the meters used to be 1 inch, so they're having to come up with a way to fill in the gap, so they have some extra parts on either side of the meter to make it longer. PVC, having to mess with any of the PVC really isn't part of that installation, only if they were to have broken something on the customer side. That would be the only way that we would know if that was the case, that they could turn it back on to the water department. But since I don't know if it was repaired or not back when that got installed. So it's kind of a either or.
Okay, do you happen to have the date at which that meter was replaced?
Actually, it's probably on, if you look on that readout on the spreadsheet, that's probably, will show you the first time it actually read on there would be the date that it got installed. Is that correct, Michelle?
It looks like it only goes back through the billing period,
Okay.
but we had
Yes,
100.
it's only the billing period. It doesn't go back to the installation of the meter.
More than likely, I've seen them like in January and some in December. So it's more than likely December or January when it got installed.
It's an unfair question, but if you had to put a percentage probability on the installation of the meter being related to the leak, what would your estimate be, in your opinion?
If we didn't do anything that were to cause us to repair the PVC when it got installed, then it wouldn't have been ours at all. But if we did do some damage to the PVC or they had to readjust it, then I would say it'd probably be a 50-50.
And we don't have any record or evidence of whether or not there was a repair made, is that what you stated?
Not that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir, and I appreciate what you just brought up there, because I had that, in my mind too. I had, once the meters were installed on the city side, I had a leak right at the meter as well, and I kind of was wondering the same thing. Could it have been, and, I definitely defer to your experience and what you saw out there. I didn't see it. So I had those same questions. And so I'm looking at one of the sheets on here. And can I call out numbers that I read here, like when I'm seeing like the water bill, the leak number, the customer consumption? Can I discuss that?
You cannot, because this is being a recorded meeting,
Okay.
so it would be wise to not to.
Okay, so I'm not going to say the number. I'm just curious, when I see the leak number and I see the volume here that was leaked, I just was, all that volume on the 23rd, 24th timeframe, I didn't add up all the individual ones for that stretch of hours. I was just wondering where that number came from on what was considered the leak.
What I would do is I would just go onto the spreadsheet and do a sum formula and highlight that whole area right there.
But it would just be those dates, like what date are we talking about, the date that leaked? Just those dates, does that value correspond to those 2 dates? 3 dates?
3
Is it?
I didn't highlight all of it, because I highlighted from the 23rd when usually our billing period stops, but for this leak adjustment, I included the unhighlighted areas that were in the
Okay, but yeah, just.
upper numbers.
It was just everything in yellow then. There's some other green highlighted of high consumption uses. That wasn't added in, I guess is my.
No, that would be, usually when I do these, I'll either highlight with a red showing 0 usage. If you see green, that's irrigation, because irrigation will have a pattern on the
Okay.
same day or on the same
I
time.
get, so that wasn't included in that full big number. It was just everything that was in yellow and the few hours that were not highlighted there, that was added too. Okay.
Correct.
I just didn't know if those numbers all added up to that, but, so I guess the other question, so when did the billing period end on this? If the leak was on 4/23, what were the billing period dates on this? I'm sorry.
The billing period went to 4/23, the leak went to 4/24, but Mr. Steinmetz included the
Okay.
4/24 over 2 billing periods to put it all in one. It's one leak, so he covered it all in one.
Does that does that put all the other water usage into an upper tier, a higher rate category? All the other that wouldn't have been there, like the heavy usage on the sprinkler system, would that have pushed it up into higher rates? I guess what I'm getting is he get charged for that leak, the additional, if we're looking at the rest of that month, all that in green, is that at a higher rate and it should have been? Am I making sense what I'm asking? Yeah, that, would he wouldn't maybe have been in that higher tier had he not had that leak at the beginning of the billing period that pushed all this other stuff up into that. I could be wrong. It's just kind of a question, just to say, is he getting, would he have paid in those higher tier rates for those high usages for the rest of that billing period? I don't know if I'm making a, okay. So would that, yeah, would that have raised his bill up and, you know, I mean, I agree it was clearly a leak on there, but, you know, how does that affect the downstream usage? Should that'll quantify that up into a higher tier rate, right? And should it, maybe? It's just a question I just thought of when I was kind of trying to puzzle through this one.
I'd have to probably research that a little bit more.
I'm not sure, I was just kind of a
Well, I
question.
can address it. I don't know if the chair wants us to discuss it yet, if we're just still doing questions.
You asked a question. Do you have the answer? Go ahead.
I have a 80% answer. There's always a possibility it's not completely true, but the way I look at that, the tier rate is determined by the total volume used over the billing period, not on any particular day. So you can't really look at a segment and say, would this have been charged at a higher rate? It's based on the total volume used. That said, if you look at the way the numbers are working, there is a consistent amount of flow prior to that high usage period. If you make the assumption that that's still there, then that volume could have been a leak that is also going through the meter, but not going through the irrigation system. But if you look at the number, it's very small compared to the total. So over those couple hours, I don't believe that would have made a significant difference compared to the size of the leak that's already being adjusted.
Okay, if you feel, I wasn't clear on it, and I think I'm kind of following what you're saying, so.
So there's, roughly 80 total units. I'm not going to give the actual numbers, but that would be added, but there's, hundreds more than that for each of those hours. So I don't think it would be significant compared to the overall size of the leak. That's my opinion. Now, there's no way that the system can separate out this much that went through the meter spilled and this much didn't. We just know the total that goes through the meter. If I lied, Mr. Steinmetz, correct me.
Sounds right to me.
No, and you would definitely know more than I do about how, especially with all this work done, how everything kind of fits in. So I just wasn't sure, and I appreciate you responding to that. Thank you. That was my question.
So the only thing I would say to that is that there's no leak adjustment up through the end of Tier 2. So that's 25,000 gallons. So yes, there might be a little bit more over that, but it's going to be a very small number.
Got it.
So,
Makes sense. Thank you all.
sure. On the left, questions?
And I'm still concerned with the statement by the applicant that the PVC pipe was installed by the city did not fully extend into the connector. And I realize that if you've gone from, you probably had to put a reducer in there, but the existing pipe would have gone into that reducer. So I think I wish we had a statement from the repair plumber as to the condition when it was done, because that raises the question of, is it the city's responsibility or not? My other concern is the length of the leak, and I don't think you'd have any water pressure in the house for 2 or 3 days. I know when the driver who was chasing deer came across my front yard one day and took out my irrigation system, and my water spilled into the street. My neighbor came over and turned the meter off, or turned the water off to the house. But that's a lot of water going someplace, and it's going to be near the street. I don't see how you miss it for 3 days. I don't know. And I guess the applicant would have to be here to answer that question as to how you didn't see, you or your neighbor didn't see the water spilling out into the street. So I'm still torn on the question of, was it totally the applicant's responsibility? Did the city have some responsibility because the connector came loose? And then why did it go undetected for so long? And I guess, was this a weekend, Kat? So we didn't send a notice to the person?
It was on the 22nd, right? It started on a Thursday and extended all the way to a Saturday if we include the 24th.
And we didn't send a notice? I mean, I get notices if I leave the hose running, but I appreciate them.
I mean, I don't know-
Don't misunderstand me.
I don't know if we have those customers' information in our system, so I would have to double check to see if a notice was sent out.
Another good reason to have your information in the system.
Exactly.
So I guess I'll just leave with a lot of questions and no answers.
My questions are really along the same lines, but can you just remind me, you said the leak was about a foot from the meter, is that right?
Yes, within a foot.
On the city side, is it also PVC?
No, it's brass and copper.
Okay, so, you said on, earlier, the first question, so the city installed it, and then I thought you said something about the city doesn't really do PVC or something like that?
Yeah, normally, whenever we install a meter, basically it just hooks up directly to where the old meter went.
Right,
Before, we had a 1-inch meter, and so when we're putting it, now we have a 3/4 meter, so there's probably about an inch and a half difference that it had to make up. So there's some fittings that we had to put in there to make up the gap. So
for the PVC,
yes.
on the, okay,
So it should meet up to the PVC. Normally, the PVC has its own coupling that hooks, there's, like, here's the PVC right here.
right.
And then there's a coupling attached to it. Usually it's brass that screws into the meter threads.
Right.
Along with that.
So the city, though, did do, even though it doesn't normally do it, you did do the adjustment on the customer side to make the PVC fit the new meter, is that right? If I'm understanding correct?
No, only way we would mess with the customer side is if during installation of the meter, something broke on their side.
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding, but did you have to adjust the PVC you had to make it fit the new meter, right?
Not normally.
Oh, not normally, okay.
We actually had a company come in and install all these meters. That wasn't
Okay.
actually city workers that did it.
Okay. So whoever installed it, though, did have to do that. They had to, for the pipes that were the wrong size, they had to make them fit the new meters?
Yeah, they made them fit, but they made them fit with attachments that we bought, nothing that we had to redo on the customer side.
Okay. Because I thought you had said, and I may have misunderstood, but something along the lines of when they were installed, if there was a repair done or damage, we didn't know. And so I'm wondering if that had needed to be done when it was installed, who would have known that? Would it have been the company then who?
Yes,
Okay,
if they kept
okay.
proper records.
And would they have reported that?
They should have, if
Okay,
it did happen.
okay. Do you think there's any way to check their records just to, or they would have already reported it?
I can check, I can
yeah.
go back and find out if anything happened out there when there's installation.
Okay.
I can go back to
Just
the
to-
company and find out if they have records of what happened
Yeah.
during the installation.
And the only reason I ask is just to, I've had pipes break at my house, and while I would love the city to give me credit for it, there needs to be a justification for it. And, if the justification is because, it was, a mistake was made with the installation by this company, then that makes sense. But if it's, if there's not that, then, I wrestle with it a little bit about why, why make an adjustment if a customer's pipe broke through no fault of anybody's. So, okay, thank you.
I can look that up.
Yeah, I've got another question then, because it wasn't a break, it was a connector that came undone. So if the fittings going into the meter are all brass and the PVC pipe goes into one side, is that a compression fitting?
No, it's just, it's like something that would get a washer.
A union joint, or what, you got brass on one side and PVC on the other, is what you're saying?
We got, say here's the meter right here,
Yes,
and it usually has a brass meter, if you have brass or composite, and the threads are on each end.
yes.
Usually you have something that butts up to it, and you put a washer in it, then you screw it on there tight to where it compresses the washer on either side of that meter.
Yeah, but you're not gonna spin the PVC pipe, so you're gonna have to have a union or something in there.
Yeah, it's like a union that's.
Or a compression fitting, what do they call those things, sharks or something? I love them now. Yeah, I don't do soldering anymore, I just push everything together. But if I don't push it in all the way, it will pop.
So if you don't push it in all the way, will it pop immediately, pressure's put on, or will it pop 2 months later,
It'll pop at some point.
some point?
May I follow up? I'm sorry. So just to, because I didn't so it wasn't an actual break, it was the connection. Okay. Well, it does seem then, I mean, if the connection was done by the installation company, is that what we don't know? Do we not know if the connection was already there, or?
It should have, the connection should have already been there
Okay.
for the, from the old meter. It's just, we had to buy extra fittings to make that meter longer, to make it fit into that space that the old meter went to.
So and you're talking to somebody obviously who doesn't know anything about this, but, so would the installation company have had to touch that connection at all when they installed it?
Yes, because that nut would have had, there should be a nut on their side of the, of their connection, to where when you put that washer in between the meter and that nut, and you screw that nut onto that, which compresses the washer.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I just think of another question too, and you may have brought it up already. So this was back in April, and it looks like they submitted something during April, but there was some type of time lag. Is that all accounted for, that, we're talking about an April thing, maybe we're requesting more information? I mean, I don't remember what our time limit is, 30 days after the billing period or something. It looks like they submitted their request on time. I was just curious why, we're a couple months from out, and I'm not concerned that much about it, just kind of curious of the date there. I think they submitted their leak request it appears right after that, so I think we're in good shape. I just want to make sure we're still within the bounds of our time.
That time
crunches.
limit's for the customer, it's not for the water department.
And they did what they needed to do, so we're good. Okay, just wanted to make sure on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't see in the leak request where the applicant is actually asking for forgiveness, because he doesn't, while he indicates it, he doesn't say it was where it says that, if the water is determined to be the responsibility of the city. So he doesn't make that argument. I think he's just asking for the difference.
That is correct. If you look at the water leak adjustment request, the request from the customer is that the bill be adjusted to account for the leak.
Chair, can I add something to this?
You want to add something or ask something?
Add something. Any leaks that were experienced during the installation of the AMI systems were experienced with the fittings, not the customer's PVC pipes. Any of the leaks that the city dealt with during that, or the contractor dealt with during that meter installations? Just might help to
So
clear
any
up.
other problems that we had were not related to the PVC, is that,
Correct.
okay? I had one quick question. Do we know if there's a burst alert or anything for this? I'm just curious why the system didn't alert us sooner, or did we just not see it?
So Michelle looked at this customer's account history, and it doesn't seem like he has an account with our system. And we didn't have an email for him during this time period. So the first notification he ever received was in June of 2021, and it was for a boil water notice when we were repairing some mains over in that area. So it looks like he never received any notifications.
That's because he didn't register with our system, right?
Yes, and we didn't have any contact information to force send anything.
Maybe I didn't say it clear enough. Why didn't the city get a burst alert?
We may have, but we would need to look into that.
Okay. All right, folks, we've got several questions out here and some things that we had going on. We talked about burst alert. I don't think impacts the status of this paper necessarily, but we had a question about the calculations that were in there, and we want to check the record for installation, which we kind of did already, but we can either table this and come back to it in a few weeks, or we can, or somebody can make a motion, whatever you guys want to do, whatever we think is more comfortable on this. Before we do that, one question, is the petitioner available by phone? Okay, no problem. So we've got here, we have the summary from the water department. We have some questions answered. So the first question I'd like to pose to everybody, do we want to make a motion on this, or do we want to wait on the answers to some of those questions that y'all have?
So my view is, based on the way the ordinance is written today, we have a documented leak. We can see where it is and where it occurred. Repair was made, proper paperwork was submitted. So what we have now is sufficient under the ordinance. The questions would apply to, is there additional, city responsibility or contract responsibility or anything else? So as far as the customer is concerned, the request was to just adjust the leak in accordance with the ordinance. I would be inclined to go ahead with that, and then if we find out through investigation there's some additional information, then, customer can be informed and readdress it at that time. But given the calendar date right now, I don't really see much benefit to delaying it any further. So that's my opinion.
That's really close to a motion, too.
Getting good at this.
Any other comments from anyone?
No, I concur. The request was for a leak adjustment. And regardless, and everything's been submitted correctly, I still just, in my mind, it's 3 days of water gushing out into the street. But I would go with a motion.
That's great, but I can't make a motion.
Okay, so tell me how to word this. I move that we approve for recommendation, recommend for recommendation, and this is going to have to go to the council, that the leak adjustment for 21926 Parkview be granted. That would be our recommendation. Did I get that enough?
Yeah, I'm going to paraphrase what you said. I think you said that you have We would like to make a recommendation to the city council to approve a credit of $892.84 to 21926 Parkview.
Exactly.
I second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? The only thing I'll add to that is that we will take a note to continue investigating on that for the water department to make sure, to investigate those things that we talked about, to see if there's anything additional that we can, that is due the customer. All right, no other discussion. We'll go ahead and vote on this. So all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right. Unanimous approval to recommend to City Council the leak adjustment. All right, we are moving on to C, oh, you took it off there. C2, Water Commission activities and projects. Discuss and make recommendations on the water rate structure. I'm going to hand it over to Vice Chair Harshenberger for his 80-slide presentation.
Well, hopefully, Commissioners, you had a chance. I know that it didn't get it till this morning, but hopefully you had a chance to at least breeze through it. I'm not going to bore you with every single detail on the slides, but they're there if we need to go back and have additional discussion. I'll start off by just saying that the news is a little overwhelming the first time that you look at the information. So please, as we go through, be looking for not only are we at a position where we make a recommendation to City Council, or do we need to do more study? And I also would love to have recommendations on if you need different information presented, right? So all of that is fair game. Now we'll see if the little pointer will work. It did. So there's kind of what we're going to talk about. I'll just let you read through it quickly. And for some of you that have not been on the commission that long, this process has been going on since before 2018. Historically, it's associated with the city's decision to take the water utility, separate it from the general fund, and make it a standalone utility that is funded by rate revenue and not the general fund. So that required some detailed analysis. The city hired a contractor, Water Markets. They came in and did the initial study that was presented. There were a bunch of questions. The water rate subcommittee was therefore born to look into some of those questions. The council made a decision to approve a rate change, which was at the time, it was like the first one in over 5 or even, I think it's 5 years. But unfortunately, that process took some time, and it came out in the worst possible time of the year, right in the height of the irrigation system. Caused a major hiccup in that process. City Council decided to freeze the rates, send it back for work, and that what you see that was finished in 2018 was for going to council in their November 2019. So that was the first one under this process. We knew at the time there was going to be a series of rate increases. We were hoping it would be about 2 years long. You can kind of just read there the history. The most recent one in January of last year is for the rates that we had current now. And it looks a little complicated to read, but bottom line is we increased the base rate by a percentage, and then we increased the tier rates above tier 2 with a slight additional curve for irrigation incentives. That was kind of the history of how we got here. Every year we did this, we've been trying really hard to not have to do it again, but we've been behind and trying to catch up the whole time. And unfortunately, we're still in that same mode now. So starting off with I don't have my book handy, but the American Water Works Association publishes guidance for different size cities on how they can go through this process, and they have a whole rate setting process, and it's supposed to start with the objective. So again, by way of background, on your screen you should see typical objectives that the Association recommends that cities or utilities consider. Not that you would have all of those, but those are typical examples. So moving on, what the water rate subcommittee used previously, so in all of those things you saw in the background slide, the primary goal was full cost recovery, which the waterworks people would call that revenue sufficiency. And we also looked for revenue stability, but that was a secondary concern for cost recovery. And then, based on council guidance at the time, the second level objective was to minimize the impact to low volume users. That was historically because there had not been any rate increases and it was a rather large number. So the city wanted to spread that out a little bit more and kind of keep the low volume users from having too much of an impact. And then you can read the other two there, conservation and fixing the rate structure so that it had some sort of process and pattern to it rather than what appeared to be somewhat arbitrary numbers. So that was previous objectives. This year was the first year that process transitioned, or, we're still trying to figure this out, but transitioned to city staff taking the lead for it. And then the water rate subcommittee meeting with them and trying to ask questions and clarify and build up the information to present to you. So the city staff's recommendations are pretty similar, but the full cost recovery was the primary goal, and you'll see why here shortly. And in that is building up our cash reserves. Sort of by law, you have a minimum requirement of 6 months M&O and your full debt service. The goal for a small system like ours is to get closer to 12 months, right? Because you need that cushion for unexpected events that may occur. So that's one of the main objectives that was set. And then they highlighted revenue stability as well. Since we're a small system, it's very hard to predict what those small fluctuations will cause. And then they added, it says cost of service principles. I put no free water in quotes. We really don't have free water. What we really mean is minimize discounted water as much as possible. Cost of service principles on that previous slide, that's really making sure that it's not an equal share from everybody, but it's everybody pays the fair share of the costs. And then we still want to encourage water conservation, but you'll notice that's bumped down in the row a little bit. Those others are becoming more important. So from the staff's perspective, the top two are really the key objective that we're trying to meet. All right. The next step in the rate setting process, once you figure out your objective, is you kind of look at what the assets, the cash flow, all the stuff you would normally do with the business, and you figure out a budget. That process, the Water Commission has not been involved in the past, and we were not involved in it this year. But the council has approved the budget, so we have a revenue target. So we're at the point of this process where we're looking primarily at rate design. So we don't have the flexibility to go back and say, we don't like the expense numbers, we think they're too high, and we don't have the flexibility to change the revenue targets. Our job is to figure out what sort of rate structure will meet the revenue target in as fair a manner as possible. All right, so to do that, we got to take a look at how did we do last year. And so we'll be looking at the rates just as a reminder, some comparisons with other cities, and how our model that we use performed. So this is just for you. I'm not going to leave this up here. It's in your packet. You can reference it as we go through this. But these are the current rates that were in effect for this fiscal year 2021. It is worth highlighting that because I heard some discussion previously about commercial versus residential. The study last year recommended just leaving one set of rates, but varying it based on meter size. And so that's what we have right now. That can always be looked at as a future objective. So rates vary by meter size, and then they vary by inside the city or outside the city. So those outside the city are served under a certificate of convenience and necessity. It is customary for those rates to be a little bit higher, simply because, number one, in historical reasons, they didn't pay city taxes to help build the system. But also, it is, like I said, we're required to provide them with water, and they're outside the city, so it's additional cost. Our rates, however, from last year are a little bit high I shouldn't say high, that's a bad word, but they are above the average from the cities in our local area. All right, so then we also needed to look at consumption. So this is inside the city limits, and we point out that we had, at the end of year, 15 1,585 total accounts, and what you see in the FY21 numbers is the actual water consumption in gallons per month that was charged in each of the rate tiers. It's important to realize that if a person had let's say a 70,000 gallon usage bill, then they will have 10,000 gallons show up in the 65 to 75 tier, 10,000 in the tier below, and so on. So the zero tier number represents people who used it less than 5,000, but also represents that first 5,000 for everybody else. The number at the bottom is the actual total consumption, so you have a 4-year history to look back on. You see that it has been increasing, but in the last year it did not increase much. We only added 4 new meters, but we also had a cooler, wetter spring, early summer than usual, so that affects our consumption as well. I do want to point out that in addition to the total numbers, you can see over time the volume of water charged at those higher tiers has been decreasing, and it decreased rather substantially this last year. That can be in part due to the higher prices in the tier structure, right? So there's some conservation incentive built into the rate structure. But it's also probably reflective of the weather changes. But if the high tier folks had just used less, then the total would have gone down. So since the total did not go down, what we also see is the lower tiers are increasing. So over the last 2 years, we have not gone on water restrictions and some other things in our system, and that may contribute to changes in behavior where some of those lower tiers are actually increasing in their relative share. I would highlight that the mean numbers at the bottom show that, we have about a plus or minus 10% variation. In previous years of doing this study, that was as high as plus or minus 17%. But since 20 and 21 were very close, that brought that variation down a little bit. So just background information to keep in mind. There's the same numbers for outside city limits. You'll see that they've been increasing, but their meters did not increase. So this is all additional consumption, but it's also shifted from higher tiers to lower tiers quite substantially. All right, we did add this one for you to compare. So this is looking at bills as a percentage, so consumption in terms of the percent of total gallons for customers in each of those areas. And what we want to highlight is for inside the city, over 50% of the billed consumption is in tier 0 and tier 1. So you can think of that as meaning our median customer is actually at the top end of tier 1, bottom end of tier 2. And then on the outside city, it's even worse than that. The median customer is probably just outside of tier 0. So what that's supposed to tell us is that we have a lot of users that are at the lower end of the scale, and so changes there will make the biggest difference, all right, than anything else. On the bottom, you see the average numbers. That's gallons per month per count. So inside the city, the mean number is somewhere around 16,000 gallons per month. So that's what the users on average do. And then outside the city, it's just over 8,000 gallons. Now, this is averaged over a whole year. So customers typically don't use that consistently throughout the year. We, in fact, know that the off-peak mean is somewhere in the 7,000 to 8,000 gallon range. The peak mean is somewhere in the 33,000 gallon range. So we make most of our revenue in 3 to 4 months out of the year, and that's important to keep in mind. All right, looking at neighboring cities, this is kind of a hard slide to follow, but the takeaway here is if you look at the top row that's in red where it says base rate covers X gallons, we see that Garden Ridge includes 5,000 gallons in the base rate. Selma includes 2, Fair Oaks Ranch includes 6, and Cibolo includes 1.2. Nobody else includes any. So we're kind of on the high end of that. And then the X's just mark, the water fees are very complicated. People have different ways of splitting them up. We did our best to compare these things, or I should say the staff did their best by just considering cost of water, and we tried to note where those fees have been included. All right, so here's some comparisons for you. Looking inside the city, picked 5 that are in the area, and you'll see in your packet some backup slides that have a whole lot more information. But what this shows is for the lower tier The rates we charge are on the low end of our surrounding cities, but we have quite a progressive rate structure. So at the high usage end, we're getting near the top. All right, I'm not going to spend any time here because you can't really read it, but if the ones that are highlighted in orange are the cities that you saw in the comparison in the previous slide. The yellow is our city. The green line represents the average consumer's consumption. And so you can kind of look, in particular, I'd highlight Fair Oaks Ranch as another comparable city. And you can kind of see how we compare there if you just wanted to look at those. These rates are as of 9/20/21, what was publicly available on the website. So I'm sure they're going through the same process we are, and those numbers will change. All right, this just kind of shows that same information kind of graphically. I wanted to highlight this one primarily. If you follow, you'll see where it says Garden Ridge up here, and it's the blue line, and it has a noticeable curve. So that's that conservation incentive that was built into our rate structure. You will see kind of right below Garden Ridge, Fair Oaks Ranch has a very similar structure to what we have. The low end, they all cluster pretty well together. You can't really tell the scale. On the high end, there's quite a bit of spread, but that just gives you an idea of comparisons. Okay, this is probably the most important part of the background stuff. How did our model do that we used to predict our rates? How did it compare to our actual experience? So you'll look at where it says model forecast, that column. We predicted that we would have revenue from base rates of 568 and 605 and so on. That tells you what those predictions are. I do want to highlight down where you see net revenue and required reserve contribution. So the $102,235 is what we planned to contribute toward our reserves for this year. The model treats that as an expense, all right, or another way to look at that is restricted reserves. So when we look at the model and see net revenue, that has been included already, so it doesn't show up as revenue. I changed that in order to put on this slide to make it comparable for you to use. And so when you look down at the fund balance line, that 1,310,000 gallons, that's not the actual model prediction. That is the model prediction plus the required reserves to make it comparable to the second column, which is the city's amended budget. So what you can see is that we're actually fairly close on what the model predicted and what we did. It's about 2% difference on total revenue, and with changes in expenses, it's somewhere around 6 to 7% difference. But given the predictive nature of it, we can have a fair amount of confidence in the model, but there is some variability. I want to highlight the end of year utility report. So that's the report that we use to come up with those consumption figures we talked about, and it's the only report we have that will separate or allow us to separate base rate revenue from the volume revenue. The city's budget does not break that out. And so I just point out that the actual end of year utility report had a fixed revenue component of $500,000, which was really close to the amount that was predicted, which is expected because it's a flat fee and with the number of meters didn't change much. Okay, the volume sales looks lower, but when we pull this report, it's in September, so it's fiscal year, and the rates are on calendar year. So the end of year utility report actually has 1 quarter's worth of data on the previous year's rates. So it will always look a little bit lower if we're going through rate increases. The final thing we need to point out on this slide is the months of reserve. So the model predicted that we would have 7.1 months of reserve. That's 7.1 months of O&M plus debt service. The city budget based on 2021 would be 6.5. So we're a little bit lower than that, but still within reasonableness for the model. Now, things changed, and we'll hear about that. There's additional debt service required that was added to the budget, primarily related to things to do with the 2252 projects. That additional debt service means, and that's what the triple asterisk is, the actual reserve that you'll see if you go to the 2021 amended budget is down around 6 months because that additional debt service requirement. I didn't put it on the slide because I wanted you to compare apples to apples, right? So without that additional fee in there, we would have been much closer on the model. And let me just pause for a second and see if there's any questions on the background stuff.
I have a question. On the issue of residential and commercial rates, how did you sort of compare the prices, like to Fair Oaks Ranch? They do break out residential and commercial. So can we get a comparison of residential rates versus residential rates? How did you account for that?
So I'll let the city staff correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is it's all residential inside city limits for those numbers that we're comparing. So we just did our best to compare same rate category to same rate category. Where they had specific fees like supply fees and things like that we don't charge, we added that into the cost of water, but we did not include fees that were like specific to just debt service or something that was set aside and was not directly related to cost of, well, I should say debt service. But like if their bill included trash or something else, we just used the water component. Anything to add, staff?
But on their cost, did they give us like just the residential expense? Did they give us a breakdown of theirs, of here's the residential and here's the commercial?
All rates,
So do we have can we see then the breakout of Garden Ridge residential and commercial? Right. Right.
We have different base rates for the size of meters.
Right.
And the commercial in Garden Ridge at this point, tends to be larger meters than what your residential service has.
Okay. So in theory, then we can break out and say these are residential and these are commercial, or this is residential usage and this is commercial usage?
Well, the majority of our usage is residential, so that's why we.
We've got some commercial though, right?
We have some commercial, but they are billed at the same
Yes.
tier amount or
Yes.
tier rates as our residential.
Yes.
And we need to take into account that we have how many commercial?
10-ish.
I mean, let's say 20. I mean, we have a very, very, very small amount of commercial.
Right. Okay. And so the comparison cities then gave us just their residential when they gave us their data.
Yes.
Well,
To
let
be
me
more
say
clear-
something about this real quick. So all cities' rates are in ordinances and they're publicly available. You can go to those city websites and you can look up their rates. Now, people will do that and they'll go, oh, look how much lower their rate is, but something you don't see, if you just look at the rate tables, what you don't see is a lot of those additional fees that a lot of other cities have. So make sure you're comparing apples to apples if you do go in there and research on your own. And they accounted for that when they built their tables, when they do these comparison things. But they took those residential tables and our residential tables to compare them against each other.
So yeah, the other cities didn't actually give us the information. We went out, or I didn't do it, the staff did. They went out and found it. I just got to help package it.
Thank you.
All right, let's move on.
Just had one thing. I'm blown away by this, how accurate that model is to what you can, especially with all the variabilities of this year with the more rain, the AMI system. I'm blown away how close that is. So I just want to let you know that this is fantastic in my eyes. Thank you.
Thank the University of North Carolina, they're the ones that prepared the model. Having said that, though, I do want to emphasize, it's like a weather forecast. So we're comparing FY '21 early, at the beginning of the year, our forecast, to the amended budget, which is in mid-year. So the time frame is short. When you look at the model at the out years, the further out you go, the less accurate it will be. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right. So let's take a look at that model a little bit. This is where I am gonna go pretty quick because it's in your background, and I just want to highlight a few things. And if you have questions, by all means, stop me and we'll go back. You can't read the slide, you're not supposed to. This is just to show you that the model addresses many, many factors. It's a multi-factor model, has a lot that goes into it. It's designed to create a balance sheet, which means it looks at beginning of year to end of year. It does not predict over time, so it doesn't say like month by month. And it's a widely used model. You can go out on the website and download it. And the one that we used is the current version of that model. So that we're going to be looking at each one of those steps as we go through this. So step one, I'll just say, is setting your rates. So that's like your primary variable. That's what we're changing. So I'll talk about step one at the end. So step two is to take all that consumption data I showed you in the background and put it in the model by tier, right? So that's what you see here, both inside the city and outside the city. We had to put that into the model based upon the utility data. You can also see on this page, since questions were asked earlier, on the right-hand side, it shows accounts. And so we had 1,565 3/4 inch meters inside the city limits at end of year, 83 of those meters outside the city, and then we had an additional 20 meters inside the city of those various sizes. Some of those may be HOAs, some of them are commercial operations, but that's where we got the 1,585 total meters inside the city and 83 outside. All right, in step three of the model, there's some assumptions you have to put in. One of them is growth rate. It's a flat percentage and you have to choose it. So, there's some guesswork that goes there. So the factors that we looked at is new home construction is going to remain relatively low. There's a few houses that go up here and there in vacant lots, but no large developments planned for residential homes. Commercial construction, however, we think we're at the beginning of seeing additional commercial development. So what does that mean? We left the model the way it was. We kept a reduction of a growth rate of 0.5% for the 3/4 and 1 inch meters inside the city, and we kept it 0 outside the city, which is what we've seen over the last year. And that really equates to a prediction of 8 new meters in that category over the next year. We had 4 new meters last year. Now, people come and go, so that number changes. So I'm comparing beginning of year to end of year. All right, at the other meters, we have a 10% growth rate, but we did that because the numbers are so small that only equates to 2 additional meters in that category, and we believe that that's a realistic number for projects that may be coming in the future. However, consumption for that is set to 0 in the model, so the only impact that really has is the impact fees from installation of those businesses. All right, and then we have a projected change in average consumption. This is as you get your AMI system, as people get more into conservation, they use low flow toilets and things like that, we tend to see a decrease in demand, so we have a -1% factor for that. That's no change from the model previously. And then we have to model price elasticity, so we did not change that either. That's at -2% for a 10% increase in rates. Please keep in mind that means if you increase somebody's rates 20%, that's a 4% reduction in demand. So that will have some bearing when we look at the options going forward. And then the one-time fees, we have to go into the model and manually put in numbers and check that the end-of-year prediction matches the budget. So those are hand jam numbers, basically. But they're put in there to make sure that in year one, at the end of year, it matched the budget. All right, the hard part is putting the budget in. So just know that what we do is take a look at all those numbers and we make sure that whatever inflation number we assume, that when the model cranks it out, you end up with the right number at the end of year for fiscal year 22. It's a little bit of smoke and mirrors putting all that stuff in, but that inflation factor is essentially an arbitrary number for year one, right? So whatever we put for that inflation factor, we've adjusted the expenses so that it works out to exactly equal what the budget predicts. What that means going forward, though, is the expenses grow by 3.5%. They may or may not grow at 3.5% in the out years. The demand side has a rate increase of $1 per year on the base rates and a 3% inflation factor on the tier rates. What that does for us is make sure that we won't be in a situation where we're forecasting more revenue growth than we expect expense growth, so we're conservative on the model. That's a lot of stuff.
So can you go back one slide?
Back it up.
A couple of things I just wanted to point out, that debt service and loan payments, that is something from years ago, correct?
Okay, so we get a printout from I keep saying we, the staff did all the hard part this year. But they have a printout that has the actual debt ladder, what the service is for each year. So we go in on the model and update for the next 15 years what that debt service is. And there's
Yeah,
another
my
slide.
point is that we incurred that debt a long time ago. Correct?
Or, yes, those
That
are
was
all
from a
approved
capital
projects.
plan, a
Yes.
bond that was, how long ago was it, Ms. Kane? You know.
Some
More
of the
than
debt.
5 years. Can we just say?
I'm
more-
sorry?
More than 5 years ago?
The majority of it, yeah, more than 5 years ago.
Okay. I just want to make that small point as we went through there. And also, I see am I reading this right? That we are actually reducing our expenditures from
So
21 to 22?
Yeah, so this is the one that caused me the most trouble trying to put this together. That is a little bit of an anomaly. So the AMI project that was approved last year, council determined to fund that through reserves. So that represents a one-time charge for the AMI system. So what we really see is 2022's end of year number is very close to the 2020 audited number. And the difference in that is primarily the AMI expenditures.
Okay, so not really going down, but it's remaining flat from 2020 to 2022 for the most part.
Most part, I think the city administrator has a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I just want to clarify, our finance officer clarified that 2017 was the last debt issuance as part of the debt service. We've also included the amount that we're going to be paying on the SIB loan, which we're just waiting to sign the closing documents on that loan for the relocation of the water line infrastructure on 2252.
Okay, got it. So it's previous debt service plus the water line
Plus that,
removal at
yes.
2252.
Yes.
Okay.
But it does not have any future projects that might
No.
pop up, so we need to
No.
keep that in mind. All right, step 4, we already talked about that, it's putting the debt service. And then we get into, okay, what rates are you going to use? So basically, that's your primary variable. And when we looked at it, we had to do it 2 different ways this time. So you'll see rates where we kept the current volume tiers. In other words, 0 to 5,000 is included in the base rate. Those are going to be numbered cases when you see the results. But the results were such that we had to look at other options. So we've considered the option of adjusting tiers so that you start charging volume rates for the first gallon. Those show up as lettered tier cases. All right, so once you do that, then you go into the model and you run it a whole bunch of times, adjusting the base and tier rates until you get the result you need. That's kind of the process. Looking at the reserve requirements, so that 1817.5 number, that represents 12 months of operations plus the debt service payment. So that's what we want to have for a reserve at the end of the year. What we actually have right now is the $1,234,948, given the shortfall that you see, 582, 552. So in the model, you have to say how you're going to do that. And you can do various strategies. What was done was the objective, if you recall, was to recover the reserves within 5 years. So it's a straight line, $115,516 per year that we need to add reserves to hit that target. Now, it's a little bit misleading because when we do that, other expenses and things grow. So what you'll actually find is if we really wanted to hit that target in 5 years, that 516 has to grow by the inflation rate every year. And it does not do that in the model. So that doesn't have a major impact, but just keep it in mind as you go forward. All right, so that's all the data. So now we got to look at what do we do with all that data. So we'll look at how we figured out the options. We'll look at the results from the model, and we'll talk about recommendations. All right, so the first thing to know as we go into this is we're not really in that great of a place. If we need to add $100,000 to reserves every year, and we have an additional $100,000 of debt, but our actual net revenue is only about $100,000, we have a lot of ground to make up. Okay, so staff went and looked at, let's take a closer look at cost of service. So if we look at it, we take the expenditures, so that's, you've seen that number several times. If we divide that by the total number of accounts, you can come up with an average cost per account, which you see is $90.80. So if every account paid $90.80 a month, you would generate the required revenue, but that would make the assumption that everybody pays the same rate, which is not a realistic assumption. But it gives you an idea about if we spread the cost equally by account, that's the number you would get. All right, if we look at that, remember earlier I showed you on demand that average customer, or I should say the median customer. So if you look at outside the city, residential outside, that was around 8,000 gallons. What our current tier structure says they would pay is $57.40. That number in red below that, the $96.14, that's the first tier that it would actually have their fee reaching that average. Same thing for residential inside. Our average, if people actually use their average, we wouldn't make enough to fund the water department. What happens is they use a lot more during the peak season, and that makes up the difference. So again, keep that in mind. All right, another way you can look at it is take your expenses and divide it by total gallons of water. And if you do that, we find that the average cost per 1,000 gallons is $5.87. Now, again, that's not the true cost. That's you take all the expenses of the company and spread it equally over every gallon of water. So each gallon costs the same. That's the figure that you would come up with. And you see that that lies between our current Tier 2 and Tier 3 rates. All right. In reality, when the system generates water, there's an increased marginal cost for those last few gallons, right? In order to make sure we have the capability to take that much water out of the ground, keep it in storage, and then push it out through the distribution system. So it really shouldn't be an equal for every customer charge, but that lets you know what that figure would be if it was. All right, and then here's the elephant in the room. If we look at all the water that was in the 0 to 5,000 gallon tier and convert that to a yearly total, you get those numbers that you see there. Over the last 3 years, we've had over 221 million gallons of water that did not have a volume charge applied. So the staff's comment is we can't afford to keep giving that water away. The subcommittee added in, well, yeah, it's not really free. It represents a minimum charge, according to the way the Water Works folks would phrase that expense. But it's so low at 0 to 5,000, we're not even really recovering that minimum charge. So, but I do want to point out that it's about 1/3 of the residents, based on revenue, that are in that category. So it's a substantial number of people. There's no way we can generate a lot of revenue without changing something at the lower end of the scale. We just won't be able to do it. All right, so we said, big picture, I can maintain our current tier structure, all right, and then vary the basin tier rates to find ones that might work. And we looked at, okay, we want to recover reserves in 5 years, but what if we did it in 7 years? What if we didn't try to do it at all and just kept where we are with 6 months, which would not be recommended, but we looked at it. Those cases are the ones that are numbers. And then we also looked at, let's try changing the tier structure, dropping that down to 0, and then going from 0 to 10,000, 10,000 to 20, so on. And it's the same process after that. Those are the lettered cases. You'll also see in your data the baseline case, which is if we do nothing, what happens? And these are some of the results. So where you see missing numbers, those are cases that didn't add to our discussion. The one in the top is we do nothing and we don't try to recover reserves. We're $150,000 in the hole in net revenue. All right, if we actually try to recover reserves, if you look at line 2, we're trying to get that 12 and 5, we're $200,000 in the hole, and that's with a 250 increase in base rate, 3% increase in the first 2 tiers, and a 2% exponential factor on top of that. From 2 through 10, we just tried to, okay, how much do we have to increase it until we got positive? And you can see it finally gets positive revenue with a 750 increase in the base rate, a 4% increase in the tier rate with a 2% additional marginal increase for tier 3 and above. That's significant, and that's not bringing in any reserves. So it's not really positive. All right. Case 11, the one is the first one highlighted in yellow. The ones in yellow are ones that actually can meet our objectives. All right. So you see in 11, it took a $10 increase in the base rate, a 7% increase in the tier rate, and we still had to extend the reserve recovery period out to 7 years. When you see that 8,000 positive, you should look at anything from minus 5,000, really minus 10,000 to plus 10,000 as being about the same answer, because that's about the uncertainty in the model. All right, case 13 was supposed to be my Hail Mary, okay? None of this is working. Let's just increase everything by 20% across the board. I actually tried 12 because that's the percentage increase in our expenses and debt service. But 12 doesn't work because remember that demand elasticity? If we increase the rates that much, volume goes down and we don't cover what we need to. So it took a 20% increase to recover that revenue. All right, case 14, we didn't do that until we met again with the staff yesterday. So I'm going to come back to that one. A was the first attempt at changing the tier structure. So you can see we start charging water from 1 to 10. We did not increase the tier rates. The increase just comes about by the fact that you're charged, you know, where you would have been charged 15,000, you're now get that charge at 10,000 gallons of water, basically. And that does recover most of the cost, but not quite all of it. So case C there is an additional 250 increase on the base rate, and that meets the objectives. Case D was, well, we might want some more wiggle room, so we just increased it by 5, and you see that gives you an idea about the sensitivity in terms of rate increase and the net revenue results. And then case F is sort of our compromise position. It's a significant increase if we were to go with case C. So we said, well, what would happen if we changed the tiers and just accepted that as our big change for the year and don't change the tier rates any? If we did that, we still can get positive net revenue, but only by extending the recovery period out to 7 years. And then case G is just showing you what happens if I say, well, I only want 9 months of reserves. Again, you can always trade off the total months reserves and the timeline. It doesn't really change it for the customer because the rates are the same. All right, I mentioned 14. So when we went through a whole bunch of discussions and we really agonized over what is the best option to do because it's a significant change. So the city administrator had a brilliant idea, which is what if we just figured out what the base rate change equivalent of that is and just do it all as one increase in the base rate. And so we went back and looked at case 14, and that equivalent is about a $15 increase in the base rate. It's actually about $14.10, but because of elasticity, it doesn't generate enough revenue. So $15 increase in base rate, keeping our current tiers exactly the same with no tier rate increase gets you 12 months of reserves in 5 years, barely positive. And again, you have to, anytime we talk about increases at that magnitude because of the demand assumptions in the model, you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. All right, so those are all the cases that we looked at. What you will find is a whole bunch of data behind that, which I'm not going to go through here tonight. I will be here for another hour. What I do want, if you look quickly, what you see on the lower right-hand corner of each of these, those changes kind of give you a sense of, for each option, what is the impact on the portion of rates that are fixed charges, in other words, our base rate, and what's the volume charges. So the dark colors represent the fixed portion, and the light colors represent the volume charge portion. And so you can see how that is, oops, going the wrong way. See how that is changing? Every time you increase base rate, you see that figure go up. So there's case 14, We're generating that revenue with a significant increase in the base rate, which has the advantage of adding additional revenue stability, right? So the bigger that dark color band is, the more stable your price structure is. There's case C and F. All right, so at the end of the day, our recommendation, both from the staff and the subcommittee, was option C, and this shows you what those prices are, but it's almost a toss-up between some of those, so we'll be looking for some input here shortly. But this option would be a $2.50 increase to the base rate, following the same method for the additional higher, meters, and it would involve lowering your tiers down, starting to charge volume at the very first gallon used. But the actual tier prices are the same, they're just shifted by 5,000 gallons. All right, so that slide just summarizes. So C was the recommendation, but I want you to consider as you go forward both 14 and case F. Those all generate the necessary revenue, and they show you the choices that you have to make. C does everything that we wanted it to do. F, however, may end up being more palatable to customers and council because it kind of spreads that change out and does one big change at a time. 14 is like ripping the Band-Aid right off the wound as quickly as you can, fixes the problem all at once, but that's a huge increase. It's a little bit hard to predict what the effect on demand would be from that. So those are the options that you have to look at. And these are representative bills. So here's between case C and case F. Basically, if you look at the 5,000 gallon level customer, they will, under case F, see an increase of $14.10 a month. And in case C, $16.60. You don't have to be a math major to see that that's a big percentage change. 15,000 represents our average customer. And then we also included 35,000. Remember, our customers don't use the same amount of water year round, so that's close, that 35,000 is close to the peak rate. So your average customer during irrigation season would see a change of $43.60, which is more in absolute terms, but as a percentage, it's much more tolerable. And then you see the 70,000 impact. All right, again, you have these hopefully in your hard copy, so I won't linger on the slide. I want to show you that the next one compares C, the recommended action, to case 14, which is everything is in the base rate. And you'll see there are some advantages. So our lower tier customer does see a large change, right? They see a $15 increase, which is, a little bit more than in the previous option, but everybody sees the same $15 increase all the way across the board. So our average customer actually sees a smaller increase, and then so on as you go up. My comment here is we went in the last 2 years and deliberately increased the curvature in those volume tiers as a conservation incentive based on the objective this year of lowering that because of our revenue situation. This undoes some of that curvature, but it's still there, doesn't take it away. All right, this is looking at those same benchmark cities. What would the new rate do to us? So again, for our 5,000 gallon customer, we go from number 2 to number 5 on that list. But it's a relatively small amount in total. And if we looked at all of those cities I showed you, there's a lot of them in the $30 to $40 range. The consumption at 10,000 gallons, and this is just 3/4 inch meter inside the city, went from the lowest to right in the middle. And then if you look at the higher volume tiers, the rate goes up, but it doesn't change our relative ranking at all. And this is looking at case 14. So it has the same result, but the numbers change a little bit. All right, I did my part. Now you got to do yours. So the overall slide is still up there. You have your written packet. You've got the cases and results. So I propose that the discussion focuses on questions on those and then questions based on the recommendation. Then I've included some other impacts that might need to be considered as well. And at the end of the discussion period, what we're really looking for is, are we ready to make a recommendation to council, or do you need more information? So I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your patience.
Oh, no problem. I do have one. I'm going to start off with a question because I think it goes to the presentation. Why C? Why did the city staff and the subcommittee ultimately pick C?
All right, so I will start off by simply saying so the data was run at the end of September. City staff worked for the next 2 weeks trying to come up with their initial cut at this with some help from prior members of this commission. And then Commissioner Stone and I met with them. That was the first time we saw it because we stayed outside the process for the data gathering, and our first reaction was exactly that, why C? And it was quite shocking, to be honest. And as a result of that meeting, we went and spent the next week running a whole bunch more cases, trying to convince ourselves that there was, in fact, another way to generate the required revenue and reserves. And there is, you see them up there, but they don't really make much change. So at the end of the day, the reason for C is we cannot achieve stability objectives and our debt recovery objectives and put the city on a better footing without changing the way we do the tiers, either with a significant increase in the base rate or changing the tier structure, or both. And that's simply because there's so many users in that category. We've gone as far as we can, increasing the upper tiers. There's just nothing left there. And then the risk on the reserves is significant. So we make money, if you will, revenue above expenses for 3 to 4 months out of the year. So basically for 1 quarter. The rest of the year, we're drawing from cash reserves to pay expenses, which means we really need 9 months of reserves to make sure we don't run the risk of going into a position where the city has to loan money to the water department in order to make it through the year. So at the end of the day, with 2252 project going on and uncertainty with the commercial development and other uncertainties out there, we just thought the risk level was too high not to put effort into generating those reserves. So really it comes down to that risk discussion, but I say that with a great deal of dissatisfaction that we're where we are. I mean, for the last 3 years, we've been trying to generate those reserve numbers, and it's just proving difficult. So I'm skeptical if we don't go with one of those options, that we're not going to just keep being right back in the same place. You know, we need to change something in the structure in order to generate the kind of stable revenue that the city needs. So that's a long answer to a short question. I'd ask the staff if they have any other inputs.
Well, you went through the math again, but I get the math, and I understand that we have a solvency problem, and we need to pick one of these options. There's 3 options there that you've highlighted on this slide in particular, 14, C, and F, that essentially get us all to the same place in 3 different ways. Mm-hmm. And that was the bulk of my question, but I'll go ahead and give Nancy a shot at it and see if, why C versus 14 or F?
Well, I think we're at the point where we do need to re-examine our rate structure, yes, okay. It's kind of mind-boggling when you saw how much water was being actually consumed in those 0 to 5,000 gallon level. And I looked at that as being a way to kind of unify our rate structure. Everybody that has water going through that water meter needs to be charged per gallon like all tiers. Okay, that was the way I looked at it.
I would say, now that you mention it, that sort of rings a note with me, right? The customers are paying for the water that is flowing through their meter, rather than some people getting all 5,000 free, or some people not even using all of
You've
that
got
5,000
customers
free.
that may only be using 2,000 or 3,000 a month. But they're saying, they're paying actually the same rate that somebody that's pumping 5,000 is. So to me, it's more of a, kind of a little bit of more of an equalization as to the customers paying what they're actually using, if that makes sense. So I support the changing that tier, changing to the tier 1 range for that first 5,000, and then moving the ranges by 5,000. Then everybody's paying for everything that they are bringing through their faucets. The base rate increase, I know over the years we've been kind of using that as where we've been increasing that. And our customers probably have gotten used to that. It's a small amount in reality. And it's an amount that is paid, we continue that base rate. That is our guaranteed revenue. Everyone pays that same base rate. Doesn't matter what tier you're being charged for. I will say this, that I think changing the tiers and increasing the base rate may be a little bit, I want to use the right word, may be a little bit hard to educate the public on why we're doing it. It might be a little bit too harsh. That is just my opinion. So
No, that's all good.
those are my thoughts.
Sort of hate to put you on the spot and make you think out loud. Well, actually, no, I want to put you on the spot and make you think out loud a little bit. It all worked out good, though, because it helped me think through this also. And then I promise I'll stop talking after this, guys. But I think increasing or accounting for the tier 1 range accounts for the actual water that people are using. And I think that base rate increase, looking at the difference between C and F, I think really what that buys us is the 2-year buildup in reserve, which is a risk decision, if I heard
Correct.
you properly earlier. And now we're reducing our risk exposure a little bit, which, lucky for us, city council decides on that, not us. But
And maybe
I'm just
this,
teasing, so.
one of my thoughts also was perhaps if it's the tier this year, next year maybe it's that base rate. And we can bring that reserve or bring our needs closer together. But it won't be such a hard impact on the residents, on our customers.
And I have to ask this, I mean, do we expect expenditures to remain relatively flat? I mean, without any unforeseen instances or anything?
No.
Okay.
We're going
You
to
don't need to go
feel
there
what.
right now. I get it, yeah.
We're feeling exactly what everyone else is feeling.
Yep. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop now and think what questions we have on the left.
Well, great job on all of this, first of all. It's a lot of information, but looking at it without any explanation, I admit it was got a little bit of a headache there. But it definitely, you went through it very quickly, but very well, so thank you, and great job on all of that. I actually like C2 for the reasons that you said. I like that it, starts at 0 and, gets everybody. The only thing I would like to consider adding or have considered at some point, I realize we don't have a lot of commercial businesses yet, but the goal is to attract them. That was the whole purpose, I think, for the work done along 2252. And, I think it would be beneficial if we had not only a higher rate for commercial customers, but a higher installation rate for commercial. Right now, it looks like the installation rate's the same as, it's based on the size meter, but it looks like it's the same. So just, to be proactive and plan for the future, rather than wait till the businesses come and then increase it, I think it would be a good idea to consider making some kind of a change now. But great job.
I want to thank, Commissioner Chairman Mueller for taking me off this committee. But no, I echo, I had the same concerns with the commercial rate, and if it's in an ordinance, and I think we need to, this next year.
We'll add commercial rates to the future agenda,
Yes.
but we don't,
Well, I'm not talking about discussing them, but if it's in an ordinance, we need to amend the ordinance to address a commercial rate of some sort. But yeah, we need to look at that. And then the base rate, so that 250, is that per gallon up all the way through all the tiers?
are you talking about C?
I'm sorry. Yes.
So increasing so current base rate, if we're talking about 3/4 inch meter, is $27.50, so that would go up by $2.50. But the way that's charged, it would affect all the counts. It's a per account charge, not a per gallon charge. So every account pays that base fee.
Okay, but that isn't added up through the tiers. That's just a base.
No, column
Okay.
3, the percent increase to tier rates,
Okay.
that is your increase to all the tiers. So there is no tier rate increase.
We lost it. Yeah.
Yeah, can you go back to the previous?
Okay.
So from 14 down, there is no increase to tier rates.
But you, and that gives us a slight reserve, but not outside that 10K number you threw out earlier.
Correct. So there, it could be a little positive, it could be a little negative, but remember this net income is after you've put aside the $116,000 for addition to reserve. So really, as long as that number is 0, the model is predicting positive results. I'm simply pointing out that our fluctuation, 0.6% of revenue roughly is about $5,000 worth of change. So it just depends on how much sensitivity we want to put in the model. We do look at this every year. So, I think the subcommittee's feeling was, like that option 14 with 546, that one's a little iffy. But any number that gets you in the, any number that's positive is good. The closer it gets to 3,000 to 5,000, the more comfort we have. But Like I said, you have to take each of these with a little bit of, it's forecast, right? So there's going to be some variation.
No, I realize that, and I do realize we need to increase the funding for the water department. My only other concern or question, I guess, the weather people say we're going into an El Nino, is it? So we're going into a drought this coming year? So that might affect your projections.
On the right?
I've talked enough.
And to get a little echo, everybody's saying this is great stuff to me. I love it. One of the things you said earlier was part of the goal is revenue stability. And it seems to me like doing the base, increasing the base rate is going to be the best thing for revenue stability in my mind. Like you said, El Nino coming, whatever, all the unpredictable things, that's the most stable, I think, for revenue stability. So, and it's, the price increases they're there, but part of life in Texas with droughts, I guess, type thing. So to me, that's definitely jumping out as the best option.
Which option? All right, one thing I will say about this, as we do take this to city council, I certainly don't want to take them one option. I think breaking it down to, I think this chart is actually excellent of breaking all this stuff down. But I think, we can show all of these, we can skinny this chart down. However, we decide we want to actually present all of this information when we get to the city, but definitely more than one option. And I think we need to narrow it down then. It sounds like we're all saying the same thing about our recommendation. Am I correct? And do we need a motion to decide this, or yes? Seeing nod. All right.
Do you want a motion that includes more than one rate, or just a motion for C, or?
Just a motion for our recommendation to city council, and we will display this data to them. I think our intent is to give them pretty much the same briefing, just maybe a little less background. Is that true?
So what we've done in the past is, once we have the Water Commission's recommendation, we'll put that forward. So they'll have, all the background information will be in the packet, but we have a summary slide, so it's considerably shorter information, and they're in there as backup information if they need it. And so we'll have the recommendation, and then we usually have, 2-3 other options that were looked at. So yes, I am looking for which ones do you want to continue with. I do, before you actually make a motion, I do want to point out one thing, because it was mentioned on revenue stability. So the option 14, with all the increase in the base rate, significantly changes the percent of our revenue that is from guaranteed fixed revenue to the volume tiers. But it's a big change. It's a huge change. And it doesn't address the concern the staff had with those first 5,000 gallons of water. Option C, when you look at the detailed information, it looks like it doesn't fix that stability problem, because it adds as much to the base revenue as it does to the volume tiers. So the bars go up, but it doesn't really change the percentage. But I would point out that by shifting that down 5,000 gallons, much of that volume is from customer classes and consumption that is not very elastic for price and demand. In other words, it'll continue to be used. So both options likely do increase revenue stability, but the option C with the curvature and the higher end is the one that would fluctuate more with seasonal changes. So that's just something to keep in mind. Part of the reason for 14 is just to show people who are concerned about the impact of lowering those tiers. What is the equivalent impact if we just charged you more in your base rate? So they're roughly equivalent, but it has different effects at the top end. So those are things to keep in mind. And please do address some of those other things. I think that the rate review process still needs to get improved. And in particular, I feel like we were kind of hitting in the dark because we didn't have a council-approved objective. And I would rather be involved a little bit more on the front end than just trying to guess on what it is that they want, especially when you start talking to the public about these large changes. Secondly, I know there's going to be some public education that goes on with this, but I think that in the future, that should be part of, the Water Commission. We should get more input on making these changes. So any other comments that you have that you want us to carry forward to the council, that's fair game. But the thing we got to have to walk out is, do we take an option? Are you comfortable, if it's C, great, make that recommendation, take that to council with a couple of options. But we need to be pretty convinced that that's what you want to do. I will tell you, in the subcommittee or the subcommittee staff meeting the other day, it was probably like there's somebody advocating for each one of those options. So when it came down, it was almost, let's just roll the dice and pick one. Because they do come to the same place. It's just, do you want to tolerate the risk, right, on the reserves? Do you want to increase stability by having that guaranteed chunk, just pull it off all at once? Or do we want to make the focus changing the tier structure to capture those first 5,000 gallons? It's really whichever one you think is most important and objective. So without a council objective to go by, I have to leave it to your discretion. I'm done.
So what you're saying is all three of those highlighted options all had their pros and cons? Okay.
Thank you for condensing
Oh, and thank you for that. And like, we're just looking at this I didn't look at this before now. And what jumped out at me was what I said, but you all have spent a lot more time on it. So I do really, your advice on this is extremely helpful because I'm not seeing the whole picture like that you've seen going through this. And that's why I kind of jumped at that. But that, to me, it's kind of a first reaction, right? I mean, without studying more, and you brought up a lot of points. That still seems to me like the best one. But, I don't, this may sound strange, my vote, I'm real curious to, the people that have been looking at it the longest, I definitely want to make sure that I'm not going against something that you all have come up with because I'm just not thinking of it on the spot or something. So I appreciate you going into the detail that you did. But, if I have to make a call here, I know what I would choose, but I would definitely like your counsel on that as you just explained, if that makes any sense.
We are to that point in the night where we choose and make recommendations.
I would propose a motion that we move the study forward to the city council with a recommendation from this body that option C be the one that's considered with the other options presented.
I'm sorry, which other options presented?
I don't know. Pick the highlighted ones.
The highlighted ones are 14 and F.
14, C, and F with a strong recommendation. Whoop.
Okay.
14, C, and F with a recommendation that C be the one adopted.
All right, so we have a motion to move forward to city council water rate increase based on recommendation C, which also proposing the alternatives of 14 and F. Is that good for those ever listening for the motion? Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
A second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Just
On
to
the left.
clarify, the council, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, the council will still have all the options in the background so they can ask questions for it if they come up with those ones in the motion would be the ones that get highlighted.
Yes, maybe that's C as our recommendation with 14 and F as our primary alternates. How's that? So the motion is to forward to City Council the recommendation for a water rate increase with option C as our recommendation, 14 and F as our alternates, but they'll have all the background data. Anything else on the right side for discussion? Any other discussion on the left? Okay. So all in favor, say aye. Opposed? All right, so we have a unanimous recommendation to go to City Council. All right, we've been here for quite a while, so I am going to do my best to try to go through things here. We are on item 2, Roman numeral 2, Commission's activities and projects list, and receive updates from the commissioners. I'm just going to go ahead and do this by exception as we go through here. If anybody has any updates, we've heard plenty from the Water Rate Subcommittee, so they are not allowed to talk anymore. We've heard a little bit about the ordinances already tonight, but if there's anything else from anyone from the last month that you'd like to bring up, starting on the right? No, sir. On the left? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and close that item and keep moving on here. Discuss, make possible recommendations on future meetings or directions on Water Commission activities and projects. Do we have anything on the left?
Just, and maybe I'm in the wrong place, for the next meeting to.
Yep, we'll get there in a second. It's
Gotcha.
like 2 more items. Yep. Mhm. Anything? The only thing I would like to add about Water Commission projects there is that, Vice Chair, you alluded to it about the writing down the water rate process was on there, and you made a note about that, so if we can just go ahead and capture that about getting the objectives from City Council and get all that captured so that we can remember all of this for next year. Thank you. All right, we are now to ordinance 210. Discuss, make recommendations related to the application of ordinance provisions to commission members if needed. I did not see anything that was needed. Anything on the left? No? On the right? Okay. Then we'll go on to move to item number 4, future agenda items, commissioners' input on agenda items. So I already heard and took a note for y'all on the commercial rates. We did a commercial rate study I don't know, year or 2 ago. We will dig up those notes and bring that up and open that up for discussion and see if we can get the background about why and see what we can do perhaps in the future. Sure. Any other inputs on agenda items on the right? Anything else on the left? Nope. Okay. The next item, future agenda items for Roman numeral 2, reschedule Tuesday, November 23rd and Tuesday, December 28th regular meetings. As we look at this, Tuesday, December 23rd is shortly before Thanksgiving. So in the past, what we've done is we have moved that up 1 week. Also, if you will look at, if you can scroll down to December for me quickly, if you look at the December 28th meeting, that falls between Christmas and New Year's. And in the past, we've also moved that forward 1 week. That would put those meetings respectively on November 16th and December 2nd. If anyone would like to make a motion to move a couple meetings up 1 week.
All right, Mr. Chair, I will make a motion that we move the November Water Commission meeting to November 16th, a 1 week advance, and that we likewise do the same with the December meeting, moving it up to December 21st.
Okay, we have a motion to move the November meeting up to November 16th and the December meeting up to December 21st. Do I have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the left? On the right? All in favor, say aye. All right, unanimous. We'll go ahead and move those 2 meetings. What I will say is that compresses the time before our next meeting. There was a couple of things that were brought up previously. I'll talk to the city staff about it, it's fine. Let's move on. All right. Item number 4.3, the date, time, and location for the next meeting will be now November 16th, 2021 at 6 PM right here at City Hall. Now we're to item 6, citizen comment period. There are no citizens present, so we'll continue moving on to item 7, adjournment. This concludes all the items on the agenda. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn, a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, we have a meeting adjourned at 8 PM.